Ethan lived a quiet life in the rolling hills of Vermont, where the days stretched long and peaceful. His world was simple, made up of golden fields, rustling leaves, and the soft hum of nature that seemed to sing just for him. Ethan wasn't. Like most people his age, he didn't chase dreams of wealth or fame. Instead, he found joy in the little things: the smell of fresh soil after rain, the sight of sunflowers swaying in the breeze, and the sound of birds chirping as they flitted from tree to tree. To Ethan, happiness wasn't something you bought with money. It was something you grew, nurtured, and cherished. Every morning, Ethan woke before sunrise, stepping out onto the porch of his small farmhouse. The air was crisp and cool, carrying with it the promise of a new day. He would stretch his arms, take a deep breath, and then head to the barn to check on his animals. There were cows waiting to be milked, chickens clucking softly as they pecked at their feed, and a loyal old dog named Max who wagged his tail every time Ethan walked by. It was hard work, but Ethan never complained. He loved the rhythm of farm life, the way each task flowed into the next, creating a cycle that felt almost sacred. Despite his contentment, there were moments when loneliness crept in. Ethan's parents had passed away years ago, leaving him to manage the farm alone. At first, the silence had been unbearable, but over time he learned to find comfort in it. Still, there were nights when he sat by the fire, staring into the flames, wondering if anyone else out there understood what it meant to live so close to the earth. Sometimes neighbors would stop by to chat or share a meal, but those visits were rare. For the most part, Ethan kept to himself, finding companionship in the stars above and the land beneath his feet. One autumn morning, Ethan decided to take a break from his usual routine. The farm was thriving, and he figured he deserved a few hours to himself. He grabbed a thermos of coffee, laced up his boots, and set off toward the cliffs that bordered his property. The hike wasn't easy. Steep trails twisted through dense woods and fallen leaves crunched underfoot, but Ethan didn't mind. If anything, he welcomed the challenge. The higher he climbed, the more breathtaking the view became. From the top of the cliff, he could see miles of countryside stretching out in all directions, painted in shades of orange, red, and gold by the changing season. As Ethan neared the summit, he noticed something unusual. A faint sound reached his ears, carried by the wind, a mix of sobs and whispers. At first, he thought it might be an animal in distress, but as he moved closer, he realized it was human. Peering cautiously over the edge of the cliff, he saw her, a woman sitting dangerously close to the precipice, her legs dangling over the side. She wore expensive clothes, a sleek coat, tailored pants, and polished boots that looked completely out of place against the rugged backdrop. Her hair shimmered like sunlight, and even from a distance, Ethan could see tears streaming down her face. For a moment, Ethan froze. He wasn't sure what to do. The last thing he wanted was to startle her, but he couldn't just walk away either. Taking a deep breath, he called out softly, "Hey there, are you okay?" His voice was calm, steady, and full of concern. The woman jumped slightly, clearly startled, but she didn't turn around. Instead, she hugged her knees tighter to her chest and whispered something Ethan couldn't quite catch. Ethan took another step forward, careful not to make any sudden movements. "Please," he said gently, "you don't have to talk to me if you don't want to, but I'd really like to help." The woman finally glanced over her shoulder, her eyes wide with surprise. For a split second, their gazes locked, and Ethan felt a strange jolt run through him. He couldn't explain it. It was as if he'd known her forever, even though they were strangers. Slowly, he lowered himself to the ground, keeping a safe distance, but making sure she knew he wasn't going anywhere. "I'm Ethan," he said, offering a small smile. "What's your name?" She hesitated, her lips trembling as if unsure whether to trust him. Then, barely audible, she whispered, "Victoria." And just like that, two worlds collided, one rooted in simplicity, the other drowning in complexity. Little did Ethan know this chance encounter would change both their lives forever. Victoria didn't respond right away. Her gaze returned to the horizon where the sky met the earth in a blur of colors. The wind whipped through her hair, and tears continued to stream down her face, but she made no effort to wipe them away. Ethan sat quietly, giving her space while maintaining a watchful eye. He could see the turmoil in her expression, the pain, the exhaustion, the weight of whatever burden she carried. It was clear that this wasn't just a bad day for her. It was something deeper, heavier, more suffocating. Ethan decided not to push her. Instead, he focused on keeping his tone calm and reassuring. "You don't have to tell me anything," he said softly. "But if you need someone to listen, I'm here." His words hung in the air for a moment before Victoria finally spoke. "I don't know why I came here," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I guess I thought maybe this place would feel different, less crowded, less noisy. But it's all the same inside my head." She paused, looking down at her hands, which were clenched tightly together. "No matter where I go, I can't escape it." Ethan nodded slowly, as if he understood. Even though he couldn't fully grasp what she was going through, "It sounds like you've been carrying a lot," he said. "Sometimes people think they're alone because no one else sees what's happening inside. But trust me, you're not alone. Not anymore." Victoria turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face for sincerity. What she saw surprised her. There was no judgment in his expression, no pity or impatience, just kindness, a quiet, unwavering kind of compassion that felt almost foreign to her. In her world, people wore masks. They smiled when they didn't mean it, laughed when they wanted to cry, and pretended everything was fine even when it wasn't. But Ethan, he was different. He seemed real. For the first time in what felt like forever, Victoria allowed herself to let her guard down. She began talking, haltingly at first, then with increasing urgency, as if the words had been trapped inside her for too long. She told Ethan about her life, how she'd grown up in luxury, surrounded by wealth and privilege, but always feeling like an outsider, how her family expected perfection from her, demanding that she excel in school, business, and social circles without ever asking what she truly wanted, how her marriage had become a hollow shell of what it once was, filled with arguments, secrets, and resentment. "And now," she said, her voice breaking, "I don't even know who I am anymore. I've spent so much time trying to be what everyone else wants me to be that I've lost myself completely." She gestured toward the edge of the cliff. "I came here thinking, maybe if I got far enough away from everything, I could find some peace. But instead, I just feel more lost than ever." Ethan listened intently, his heart aching for her. He couldn't imagine living a life like hers, one dictated by expectations and obligations, devoid of freedom or authenticity. Yet, despite their vastly different circumstances, he recognized a familiar thread in her story: the longing for connection, purpose, and meaning. It was something he'd felt himself during those lonely nights after his parents passed away, when the silence of the farm seemed deafening. When Victoria finally fell silent, Ethan took a deep breath. "You know," he said, "sometimes we get so caught up in running from our problems that we forget we already have everything we need to face them. You came here looking for answers, but maybe the answer isn't out there." He pointed to her chest. "Maybe it's in here." Victoria blinked, taken aback by his words. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. Not her husband, not her friends, not even her therapist. Most people offered solutions or platitudes telling her to stay strong or keep pushing forward. But Ethan's approach was different. He didn't try to fix her, he simply reminded her that she had the strength to fix herself. "Do you believe that?" she asked quietly. "That I can start over?" Ethan smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I do," he said. "Because I've been where you are. Not exactly, of course. We've had very different lives. But I know what it's like to feel stuck, to feel like the weight of the world is crushing you. And I also know that sometimes all it takes is one small step in the right direction to change everything." Victoria stared at him, her mind racing. For years, she'd relied on others to guide her, to make decisions for her, to tell her what to do. But sitting there on the edge of the cliff, listening to Ethan's steady voice, she realized something profound. She didn't need anyone else to save her. She had the power to save herself. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the landscape, Ethan stood up and extended his hand to her. "Come on," he said. "Let's get you off this ledge. We'll figure things out. Together, okay?" For a moment, Victoria hesitated. Then with a shaky breath, she reached out and took his hand. As he helped her to her feet, she felt a spark of hope, a tiny flicker of light in the darkness that had consumed her for so long. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, she felt ready to face it. The walk back down the trail was quiet, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Ethan walked beside her, occasionally pointing out interesting plants or sharing stories about the land. Victoria listened, finding comfort in the simplicity of his words. By the time they reached the base of the cliff, the tension in her shoulders had eased slightly, replaced by a sense of calm she hadn't felt in ages. Before parting ways, Ethan invited her to visit his farm. "If you want to," he added quickly, sensing her hesitation. "It's not much, but it's peaceful. Sometimes a change of scenery helps." Victoria nodded, surprising herself with how eager she felt to accept. "Thank you," she said sincerely, "for everything." As Ethan watched her drive away, he couldn't shake the feeling that their meeting wasn't just coincidence. It was the beginning of something extraordinary. The next morning, Victoria found herself driving down a narrow dirt road lined with tall trees that swayed gently in the breeze. She had spent most of the previous night replaying her encounter with Ethan in her mind. His words lingered like an echo, calm, steady, and full of sincerity. They were unlike anything she'd ever heard before. In her world, conversations were often laced with hidden agendas or polished facades, but Ethan's honesty felt raw and unfiltered. It was disarming, refreshing, and strangely comforting. As she approached the farm, the landscape opened up into wide fields dotted with grazing cows and rows of crops stretching toward the horizon. The air smelled earthy and fresh, carrying the faint scent of hay and wildflowers. A red barn stood proudly against the backdrop of rolling hills, its paint slightly faded but still charming. Chickens pecked at the ground near the fence while a golden retriever bounded excitedly toward her car as she parked. Ethan emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a worn pair of jeans. When he saw her, his face lit up with a warm smile. "You made it," he said, walking over to greet her. Victoria stepped out of the car, feeling oddly self-conscious in her designer clothes. She tugged at the hem of her blouse, suddenly aware of how out of place she looked amidst the rustic simplicity of the farm. "I wasn't sure I'd come," she admitted. "But something about this place, it feels different." Ethan chuckled lightly. "Different can be good sometimes." He gestured toward the dog wagging its tail furiously at her feet. "This is Max, don't worry, he won't bite. He just likes saying hello." Victoria bent down cautiously, letting Max sniff her hand before scratching behind his ears. To her surprise, the dog responded with enthusiastic licks, making her laugh for the first time in what felt like weeks. It was a small moment, but it broke the tension, easing her nerves. For the rest of the day, Ethan showed her around the farm, explaining how everything worked. He introduced her to the cows, pointing out which ones were particularly friendly, and explained the process of milking them by hand. He led her through the vegetable garden, plucking ripe tomatoes and handing her one to taste. The flavors burst in her mouth, sweet, tangy, and impossibly fresh, and she realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten something so simple yet satisfying. Throughout the tour, Victoria peppered him with questions, genuinely curious about his way of life. How did he manage the workload alone? What inspired him to stay on the farm after losing his parents? Did he ever feel lonely? Ethan answered each question thoughtfully, sharing pieces of himself without hesitation. He told her about the challenges of farming, the unpredictable weather, the early mornings, the physical toll, but also about the rewards. Watching seeds sprout into plants, seeing animals thrive under his care, and finding peace in the rhythm of the seasons. In return, Victoria opened up more about her own life. She spoke about growing up in a sprawling mansion where silence was rare and privacy even rarer. About attending lavish parties where everyone wore masks of happiness, hiding their true feelings behind forced smiles. About marrying a man who loved the idea of her more than the person she actually was. And about feeling trapped in a gilded cage, surrounded by wealth but starved for authenticity. Ethan listened intently, nodding occasionally but never interrupting. There was no judgment in his eyes, only empathy. For Victoria, this was new territory. People in her circle rarely listened. They were too busy talking about themselves or offering unsolicited advice. But Ethan gave her his full attention, making her feel seen and understood in a way she hadn't experienced in years. By late afternoon, they sat together on the porch steps, sipping lemonade Ethan had made from lemons grown in his garden. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields. Birds chirped lazily in the distance, and the occasional moo of a cow drifted through the air. "You know," Victoria said after a long pause, "I've always envied people like you." "People like me?" Ethan raised an eyebrow, amused. "What does that mean?" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "People who seem free, who live without all the noise and pressure I deal with every day. You don't have assistants managing your schedule or paparazzi following your every move. You wake up when you want, work because you love it, and go to bed knowing exactly who you are. I think I'd give anything to have that kind of freedom." Ethan leaned back, resting his elbows on the step behind him. "It's not as perfect as it seems," he admitted. "Sure, I don't have cameras flashing in my face or board meetings to attend, but I have my own struggles. Loneliness, uncertainty, doubt. They're universal. No amount of money or privilege can shield you from those things." Victoria nodded, slowly, absorbing his words. She knew he was right, but it didn't change the fact that his life felt simpler, purer somehow. "Do you ever wish for more?" she asked. "For fame or adventure or, I don't know, excitement?" Ethan shook his head. "Not really. I used to think maybe I was missing out on something, but now I realize that happiness doesn't come from chasing bigger, better, or flashier. It comes from being content with what you have and finding beauty in the little things." He glanced at her, his expression softening. "And honestly, I think you already know that deep down. You just need to remind yourself." Victoria looked away, blinking back tears. His words struck a chord within her, stirring emotions she'd buried long ago. For so long, she'd equated success with external achievements, money, status, power. But sitting here on this humble farm, surrounded by nothing but nature and kindness, she began to see how hollow those things truly were. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Ethan stood up and offered her his hand. "Come on," he said with a grin. "Let me show you one last thing before it gets dark." Curious, Victoria took his hand and followed him to the edge of the property, where a small pond reflected the fading light like glass. Fireflies danced above the water, their tiny lights flickering in the dusk. Ethan pointed to the scene, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is my favorite part of the day. When everything slows down and the world feels quiet enough to hear your own heartbeat." Victoria stared at the tranquil view, her chest tightening with emotion. In that moment, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to reclaim her life. Not by running away from her problems, but by embracing the simplicity and truth she'd glimpsed here on this farm. When they finally headed back to the house, the stars had begun to appear, dotting the night sky like diamonds. As Ethan bid her good night, Victoria couldn't help but feel grateful for the day, for his friendship, and for the glimmer of possibility that now seemed within reach. Over the next few weeks, Victoria found herself returning to Ethan's farm again and again. Each visit felt like stepping into a different world, a sanctuary where time moved slower and the air seemed lighter. At first, she told herself it was just curiosity, a desire to understand how someone could live so simply yet seem so fulfilled. But as the days turned into a month, she began to realize there was more to it than that. Something about Ethan and the life he led drew her in, awakening parts of herself she thought were long gone. On one of her visits, Ethan handed her a pair of worn gloves and invited her to help him with the morning chores. "You've seen me do this enough," he said with a teasing grin. "Now it's your turn." Victoria hesitated, looking down at the gloves skeptically. Her manicured hands had never done anything remotely close to manual labor. She glanced at Ethan, who was already heading toward the chicken coop, and sighed. If she wanted to be here, to truly experience his world, she couldn't stand on the sidelines anymore. The work wasn't easy. Collecting eggs required patience and precision, especially when the hens decided they weren't in the mood to cooperate. Feeding the cows meant lugging heavy buckets of grain across uneven ground, and mucking out the stalls left her arms sore and her clothes covered in dust. Yet despite the challenges, Victoria discovered something unexpected: joy. There was a strange satisfaction in seeing the results of her efforts: the clean barn, the contented animals, the neatly stacked hay bales. It was a far cry from the sterile boardrooms and glittering events that had once defined her life. As they worked side by side, their conversations deepened. Ethan shared stories about growing up on the farm, learning the ropes from his parents, and coping with their loss. He spoke openly about his fears and doubts, admitting that there were times when he wondered if he'd made the right choice staying behind while his peers pursued careers in cities. But through it all, he remained steadfast in his belief that happiness came from within, not from external validation or material success. In return, Victoria opened up even more about her struggles. She talked about the pressure to maintain appearances, the loneliness of living in a mansion filled with empty rooms, and the suffocating weight of expectations placed upon her by family and society. She confessed that she often felt like an imposter in her own life, playing a role written for her by others rather than carving out her own path. Ethan listened without judgment, offering words of encouragement when needed but mostly letting her speak. "You're stronger than you think," he told her one evening as they sat together under the stars. "It takes courage to admit you're unhappy, let alone try to change it. Don't underestimate yourself." His faith in her was both humbling and empowering. For years, Victoria had relied on others to tell her what to do, how to feel, and who to be. But Ethan didn't treat her like a fragile bird needing protection. He treated her like a capable human being capable of making her own choices. That shift in perspective changed everything. One afternoon, as they took a break from their chores, Victoria asked Ethan a question that had been weighing on her mind. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like to have more? To travel, see the world, experience things beyond this farm?" Ethan leaned back against the fence, considering her words. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I think about what more really means. Does it mean bigger houses, fancier cars, or endless parties, or does it mean meaningful connections, purpose, and peace of mind?" He looked at her, his gaze steady. "I've seen people chase after the wrong kind of more their whole lives, only to end up feeling emptier than before. I'd rather have less and be happy than have everything and still feel lost." Victoria nodded slowly, absorbing his wisdom. His philosophy was so simple, yet it resonated deeply. She realized that for all her wealth and privilege, she had spent most of her life chasing illusions, things that promised fulfillment but delivered only fleeting satisfaction. Meanwhile, Ethan had found contentment in the very things she had overlooked: hard work, nature, and genuine relationships. Despite the growing bond between them, doubts lingered in the back of Victoria's mind. Could two people from such vastly different worlds truly connect on a deeper level? Was it possible for her to leave behind the life she'd always known and embrace something entirely new? And even if she did, would Ethan accept her? Not as a millionaire heiress, but as a flawed, vulnerable woman searching for meaning? Her internal conflict came to a head during one of their evening walks. The sun was setting, casting golden hues over the fields, and the air carried the sweet scent of blooming wildflowers. They walked in silence for a while, enjoying the peacefulness of the moment. Finally, Victoria stopped, turning to face Ethan. "I need to ask you something," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "If I stayed, if I gave up my old life and tried to start over here, would you still want me around? Not because of who I am or what I have, but just because of me?" Ethan studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Then he smiled, reaching out to take her hand. "Victoria," he said softly, "it doesn't matter to me where you come from or what you leave behind. What matters is who you are right now. The person sitting with me on this porch, laughing at Max's antics, helping me fix the tractor, and sharing your heart with me. That's the person I care about." Tears welled up in Victoria's eyes as his words sank in. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen, not for her money, her status, or her polished exterior, but for the messy, imperfect soul beneath. It was a revelation that brought both relief and fear. Relief because she finally understood what true connection felt like, and fear because embracing it meant letting go of everything else. That night, as she drove home, Victoria wrestled with her thoughts. Images of her opulent lifestyle flashed through her mind. The sprawling mansion, the designer wardrobe, the private jets. But alongside those images were memories of her recent visits to the farm. The laughter, the simplicity, the sense of belonging she hadn't realized she'd been missing. By the time she reached her house, she knew what she had to do. The next morning, Victoria called a meeting with her financial advisor. Over the course of several hours, she outlined a plan to sell off her assets, liquidate her investments, and donate a significant portion of her fortune to charitable causes. Her advisor balked at the idea, warning her that she was throwing away decades of hard work and sacrifice. But Victoria remained resolute. "This isn't about throwing anything away," she explained. "It's about finding something real." With each decision she made, Victoria felt lighter, freer. For the first time in years, she was taking control of her life, not because someone else told her to, but because she wanted to. When the process was complete, she packed a single suitcase, loaded her car, and drove back to the farm. When Ethan saw her pull up, he walked over to greet her, a mix of surprise and concern etched on his face. "What's going on?" he asked, gently. Victoria stepped out of the car, holding his gaze. "I'm ready," she said simply. "Ready to start over. Ready to build something real. With you." Ethan stared at her for a moment, then broke into a wide smile. Without saying a word, he pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly as if afraid she might disappear. In that embrace, Victoria felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hope that she had finally found her place in the world, and the courage to stay there. The days that followed Victoria's decision to leave her old life behind were a whirlwind of emotions: excitement, uncertainty, and an overwhelming sense of freedom. For the first time in years, she woke up each morning without the weight of expectations pressing down on her chest. Instead, she stepped out into the crisp country air, greeted by the sights and sounds of Ethan's farm. The gentle moo of cows, the rustling leaves in the breeze, and the golden light of dawn stretching across the fields. It felt surreal, almost like stepping into a dream. At first, adjusting to her new life wasn't easy. The simplicity she had admired during her visits now became her reality, and it came with challenges she hadn't fully anticipated. Cooking meals from scratch, tending to animals, and repairing fences required skills she didn't possess. There were moments when frustration bubbled over, like when she accidentally spilled an entire bucket of feed or struggled to milk a stubborn cow. But Ethan was always there to guide her, his patience unwavering. "You'll get the hang of it," he reassured her one afternoon as they worked together to repair a broken fence. "Nobody starts out perfect. Just keep going." Victoria nodded, brushing strands of hair away from her face. Her hands were blistered, her clothes streaked with dirt, but she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so alive. Every task, no matter how small, gave her a sense of accomplishment. She realized that this kind of work wasn't just about survival, it was about connection. Connection to the land, to the animals, and to herself. As weeks turned into months, Victoria began to see changes, not just in her surroundings, but within herself. The constant noise of her former life, the ringing phones, the endless social obligations, the pressure to maintain appearances, had faded into silence. In its place was clarity. She started noticing things she had overlooked before, the way sunlight filtered through the trees at dusk, the soothing rhythm of rain tapping against the roof, the quiet companionship of Max trotting beside her as she walked through the fields. These little moments filled her with gratitude, reminding her how much beauty existed in the ordinary. But it wasn't just the physical transformation that amazed her. It was the emotional shift. Slowly, Victoria began shedding the layers of insecurity and doubt that had clung to her for years. She stopped second-guessing every word she said or action she took. She learned to laugh freely, cry openly, and embrace vulnerability without fear of judgment. And through it all, Ethan remained a steady presence, supportive, kind, and endlessly encouraging. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the stars twinkle to life, Victoria turned to Ethan with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever miss your old life?" she asked softly. Before I showed up and turned everything upside down?" Ethan chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Not really," he admitted. "Sure, things are different now, but different doesn't mean worse. If anything, having you here has made this place feel even more special." His words warmed her heart, but they also stirred something deeper, a question she had been avoiding. What did their future hold? They had built a strong bond, yes, but could it withstand the test of time? Could two people from such vastly different worlds truly create a life together? The turning point came during a fierce storm that swept through the countryside one autumn night. Lightning illuminated the sky in jagged flashes while thunder rolled across the hills like distant drums. The wind howled fiercely, rattling the windows and sending tree branches crashing to the ground. Inside the farmhouse, Ethan and Victoria huddled near the fireplace, wrapped in blankets as they listened to the chaos outside. "It's beautiful in its own way," Ethan remarked, gazing out the window at the storm. "Nature showing us who's boss." Victoria smiled faintly, though her mind was elsewhere. She had spent so long running from storms, both literal and metaphorical, that she hadn't considered what it might mean to face them head-on. As the rain pounded against the roof, she turned to Ethan, her voice trembling slightly. "I love you," she blurted out, the words spilling forth before she could stop them. Ethan froze, his eyes widening in surprise. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. "I love you too," he replied, taking her hand in his. "More than you know." Relief washed over Victoria, followed quickly by another wave of emotion. Fear. Fear of losing this fragile happiness she had found. Fear of making the wrong choice. Fear of failing again. Before Ethan could say anything else, she rushed on, her voice shaking. "But I don't want to ruin what we have," she confessed. "You've given me so much, a home, a purpose, a chance to start over. And I'm terrified that if I stay, I'll mess it all up. Or worse, that you'll wake up one day and realize I'm not enough." Ethan stared at her for a long moment, his expression softening. Then, without hesitation, he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as the storm raged on outside. "Listen, to me," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the noise in her head. "You're not going to ruin anything. You've already proven how strong you are by leaving behind everything you knew to build something new. And as for being enough," he paused, tilting her chin so their eyes met. "You're more than enough. You're exactly who I want by my side. Not because of what you've done or what you've given up, but because of who you are. Right here, right now." Tears streamed down Victoria's face as his words sank in. For so long, she had defined herself by external measures, wealth, status, achievements. But Ethan saw beyond all of that. He saw her soul, her essence, the person she had fought so hard to rediscover. His unconditional acceptance was both liberating and humbling. When the storm finally passed, leaving behind a calm, star-filled night, Victoria felt a profound sense of peace. She realized that true love wasn't about perfection. It was about Acceptance. Acceptance of flaws, fears, and uncertainties. Acceptance of the past with all its scars and lessons. And acceptance of the future, whatever it might bring. The next morning, as sunlight bathed the farm in golden hues, Ethan and Victoria stood together in the field, surveying the damage left by the storm. Trees had fallen, fences were broken, and puddles dotted the landscape. But amidst the wreckage, signs of resilience emerged. New buds sprouting on battered branches, birds returning to sing their songs, and the earth itself beginning to heal. "Can fix this," Ethan said confidently, gesturing toward the repairs that needed to be done. Together. Victoria nodded, smiling through tears. Together they got to work side by side, rebuilding not just the farm but their lives. Each nail hammered, each board replaced, each step forward brought them closer, not just to restoring what the storm had taken, but to creating something stronger, more enduring. By the time winter arrived, wrapping the farm in a blanket of snow, Victoria knew she had made the right choice. This was her home now, not because of the land or the house, but because of the man standing beside her. Ethan had saved her once, pulling her back from the edge of despair, but in doing so, he had also taught her the most valuable lesson of all, that true salvation comes from within. As they stood together under the starlit sky, their breath visible in the cold night air, Victoria rested her head on Ethan's shoulder. She didn't need to say anything. The silence between them spoke volumes. They had weathered the storm, and in its aftermath they had found something rare and precious. A love built on trust, respect, and a shared vision for the future. And though challenges lay ahead, Victoria knew one thing for certain. As long as they faced them together, they could overcome anything. Months turned into a year, and the farm transformed in ways neither Ethan nor Victoria could have imagined. What had once been a modest plot of land now buzzed with life, not just from the animals and crops, but from the people who began visiting regularly. Word had spread about the little farm tucked away in the Vermont hills, where two unlikely souls had built something extraordinary together. Neighbors, friends, and even strangers started showing up to learn, share stories, and find inspiration in the simple yet profound way Ethan and Victoria lived. It all began when Victoria suggested turning part of the barn into a community space. "What if we invited people to come here?" she asked one evening as they sat by the fire. Not for profit or anything like that, but just to connect, to show them that happiness doesn't have to be complicated. Ethan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "You mean like workshops? Events?" "Exactly," Victoria said, her eyes lighting up. "We could teach farming basics, host art classes using natural materials, maybe even start a small market for local artisans. This place has so much potential, it's not just ours, it's everyone's." Ethan smiled, seeing the excitement in her voice. "I think it's a great idea. Let's do it." And so they did. With hard work and determination, they converted the old barn into a welcoming hub for creativity and connection. They painted the walls bright white, hung fairy lights across the ceiling, and set up long wooden tables for gatherings. On weekends, the farm came alive with laughter and chatter. Families brought their children to pet the animals, aspiring. Gardeners learned how to grow vegetables, and artists displayed their crafts made from leaves, twigs, and stones found on the property. Even Max seemed to enjoy the attention, wagging his tail endlessly as kids showered him with affection. But the changes weren't limited to the barn. The farm itself became a canvas for collaboration. Together, Ethan and Victoria launched initiatives that benefited both the land and the community. They planted rows of fruit trees, inviting visitors to pick apples and berries during harvest season. They dug a new irrigation system, teaching others sustainable farming techniques. And they hosted stargazing nights, laying out blankets in the field so people could marvel at the constellations above, a luxury rarely experienced in cities cluttered with light pollution. Through it all, Ethan and Victoria grew closer. Their partnership wasn't without its challenges. There were disagreements about priorities, moments of exhaustion, and days when the workload felt overwhelming. But they faced every obstacle as a team. Each triumph strengthened their bond, proving that love wasn't just about shared joy. It was about navigating difficulties hand in hand. One crisp spring morning, as daffodils bloomed along the fence line and birds chirped cheerfully in the trees, Ethan surprised Victoria with a quiet gesture that spoke volumes. He led her to the edge of the cliff, the very spot where they had first met, and handed her a small wooden box. "What's this?" Victoria asked, her curiosity piqued. "Open it," Ethan replied, his smile soft and knowing. Inside the box was a delicate necklace, its pendant shaped like a tiny sunflower. Engraved on the back were 3 words: "Thank you for staying." Tears welled up in Victoria's eyes as she looked at him. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I wanted to remind you," he said gently, "that you didn't just save yourself. You saved me too. I was happy before you came, sure, but I didn't know what real happiness was until you stayed, until we built this life together." Victoria threw her arms around him, holding him tightly as the wind swept around them. For a moment, neither spoke. They didn't need to. The silence carried everything unsaid, wrapping them in a cocoon of gratitude and love. As the months passed, the farm continued to thrive, becoming more than just a home or a business. It became a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of second chances and the resilience of the human spirit. People often remarked on how different Ethan and Victoria seemed from the rest of the world. In an era obsessed with speed, convenience, and instant gratification, they embraced slowness, effort, and authenticity. Their story inspired others to reflect on their own lives, encouraging them to seek fulfillment not in material wealth, but in meaningful connections and purposeful living. By summer, the farm had grown into a vibrant community hub, drawing visitors from neighboring towns and beyond. Local newspapers wrote articles about the Miracle Farm, highlighting how 2 individuals from vastly different backgrounds had created something magical together. Some called it serendipity, others called it destiny. But Ethan and Victoria knew better. They knew it wasn't fate or luck, it was choice. A conscious decision to embrace vulnerability, trust, and growth. On the anniversary of the day they first met, Ethan and Victoria stood together at the top of the cliff, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. Below them stretched the farm they had poured their hearts into, a patchwork of green fields, golden hay bales, and winding paths. The air smelled sweet, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers and freshly cut grass. "You know," Victoria said softly, leaning into Ethan's side, "I used to think happiness was something you chased, something you caught and held onto forever. But now I realize it's not like that at all. It's fleeting, unpredictable, and that's okay. Because every time it comes back, it feels even sweeter." Ethan nodded, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Like seasons," he said. "They change, but they always return, just like us." Victoria smiled, resting her head against his chest. She thought about how far they had come, from strangers standing on opposite sides of a cliff to partners building a life rooted in love and simplicity. It wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But perfection wasn't the goal. The goal was to keep growing, learning, and finding beauty in the journey. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared below the horizon, Ethan turned to Victoria, his expression serious yet tender. "Do you remember what you asked me that first night?" he said. "About whether I'd still want you around if you gave up everything and stayed?" Victoria nodded, her heart skipping a beat. "Yes." "Well," Ethan continued, taking her hands in his, "I want you to know that my answer hasn't changed. Not then, not now, not ever. You're my family, Victoria, my partner, my home." Her eyes filled with tears, and she squeezed his hands tightly. "And you're mine," she whispered. "Always." They stood there for a while longer, letting the cool breeze wash over them as stars began to dot the darkening sky. Behind them, the farm glowed warmly in the distance, a beacon of hope and possibility. It was more than just a piece of land. It was a reminder that no matter where life took them, they would always find their way back to each other. Because, in the end, it wasn't the farm, the cliffs, or the seasons that defined them. It was the courage to choose happiness over fear, authenticity over pretense, and love over loneliness. And as long as they held on to those choices, they knew their story would continue to unfold, one beautiful chapter at a time.